Welcome to another dimension, a dimension of understanding. You are entering a place where reality collides with truth. There are no limits, there are no boundaries. This is Off Planet Radio.
Welcome once again to Off Planet Radio Live. I'm Randy Moggins. It is Wednesday night, February the 6th, 2013. God, it still sounds weird saying that, doesn't it? And we have a wonderful show tonight. My guest is Betsey Lewis. The book is called Angels, Aliens, and Prophecy, The Connection. And Betsey is going to be with us for both hours tonight. There's been a lot of tooling about with the audio, so hopefully we've got it right now. It took me about 2 weeks after I put this new computer in to get things reset up, so give me feedback on the chats. Welcome to all on the chat room at offplanetradio.net and to all of you listening at wolfspiritradio.com on the chat room. And I think this show tonight's going to kind of maybe dovetail into what we did last week with Crystal Clark and James Horak as well. Part of what we do here is unfolding. We're unfolding the evidence. I came at this many years ago without strong biases, although I have my own opinions about things. And over the last few years of doing interviews on the subject of ET contact, of the things wrapped around this present period of time, I think a lot of people in this generation, what you would call the baby boomers, the post-World War II generation, many of us had a sense coming in that we lived in a time of destiny, that something was occurring in the world. And it's been a common thing that I've noticed with people who are experiencers, that they do indeed have that sense. And so my guest tonight's going to kind of bring some of that to the table. Next week, we are going to have what is going to be a very interesting show. Sorry, I'm not talking into my mic right now. Pardon me. Matt Presti and Robert Otey, I've been trying to get them on for a while to talk about Walter Russell and what we will just call the sacred science. And this is an important piece of the puzzle because most of our science is completely screwed up. Wow, that wasn't good. Oh, okay. That was a speaker muting out. So our science is messed up. Our spirituality has been messed with. Our history has been rewritten. And so we're left to navigate one of the most perilous times in history with a lot of jigsaw puzzle pieces. And this show is all about attempting to put together as many of the pieces as I can put together myself and working with other people who are doing similar things in the field. Trying to find people who have integrity, people who have good information, and really this is disclosure. You're not going to get it on your nightly news. You're not going to get it in your newspaper. They will not talk about this, and when they do, they would do it with a smirk on their face. And that's just the sad state of the world, that really we're our own researchers, our own media. We're responsible for our own truths. And I think having said that, there's more I want to say. One more thing. Let me know if you're having problems with my websites, because my websites are experiencing intense hacking right now. Not the sites themselves, but more directly the links going out from the website. And we're dealing with that. We're going to do basically extermination on people that have been screwing with the website. So if you have problems with the websites, if you find something disturbing about the links on the website, please let me know, because we are trying to deal with it. We are being played with. That's just the nature of the game, of the way things go in this present time. And with all of that, I'm going to spare you any further ranting. I want to introduce you to my guest, Her name is Betsey Lewis. Betsey, welcome to Off Planet Radio.
Thank you, Randy. Great to be on your show tonight.
It's wonderful to have you on. Your book, Angels, Aliens, and Prophecy, interested me from the first time I saw it, Betsey. We triangulate a lot of information, and you bring to the table this very interesting aspect of being an experiencer very early in life, of going through, regression and recapturing missing time. And this was actually an experience that you had with your mother. So maybe the best place to start with this is introduce yourself to us by telling us how you came to write this book and your experiences.
Oh, sure. Well, paranormal has just been a part of my whole life. I've had so many things happen, but it actually started, and you were talking about baby boomers, who I am, so I fit right in that area, but it started in 1950. My parents were attending the University of Moscow, Idaho. That's way up north near the Panhandle area, and I was 8 months old. They decided to take a trip to southern Idaho to visit my grandparents and other family members and show them their new baby daughter. And they started out late one afternoon or evening, and they reached an area called Numerous, Idaho. And that area is kind of remote. At the time it was. There was just a few ranches around, and they had been traveling for a while. I hadn't seen a car for miles. And just out of nowhere, they hear this horrendous noise. It just seems to envelop the whole car. The car begins shaking. They think, their only thought is a plane is going to crash on them. They couldn't imagine anything else. And, through the years, they didn't remember how long it lasted. My mother remembers my father stopping the car, jumping out. There was nothing around. There was nothing there. So,
now, you were how old at this point, Betsey? You were...
I was only 8 months old. I was in a little basket that they had in the back of the car. And, of course, that was it. And my mother kept feeling that something was out there. She kept telling my father, don't roll down the window, there's something out there. But that was the only thing they recalled. And then, in 1982, my uncle asked me about the story, if they had told me about, their UFO encounter. That's what they assumed it was, or flying saucers. That's what we called them during that time. But I said, sure. He told me all about it. My dad told me about it. My mom told me about it. And he said, well, I watched the TV movie about Betty and Barney Hill and their encounter in 1961 in New Hampshire. Right. And they had lost a couple of hours of time they couldn't account for. And he said, I remember it so clearly, he said, that your parents could not account for 2 hours. My father always knew what time he would arrive. It was, I think, like an 8 to 9 hour drive, and they were 2 hours late. And my grandparents thought they were in an accident. That's the only thing they could think of. And so that was, that experience. But 7 years later, after my 1950 experience with my parents, I was 7 years old. I was walking home from school, which was only just a few blocks from where I lived, and it was a cloudy day. I remember it must have been late fall, and I felt something following me. You know how you just have that creepy feeling that something's watching you.
Yep, I felt that many times.
Yeah, and I looked up in the sky, and I saw this gigantic silver disc in the sky. And it was coming through the clouds. It seemed to increase and decrease in size. And I couldn't imagine, because I had heard about flying saucers then, and there were stories that my mother had related to me because she was totally into those things. And so I was frightened. I didn't know what to do. I hid in some bushes. I would run, and it seemed to follow me. I know that I hid out for a while. I ended up going to somebody's home. I don't even know who this neighbor was, knocking on her door, and no one was there. No one seemed to be around. when I was having this experience. I didn't know what to do. I ran in her house. There was no one there. I got under the bed. That's what I think happened. And by the time I finally arrived home, my mother was frantic. She thought something had happened to me that she couldn't imagine what happened. But we walked outside and we looked around the neighborhood. We looked in the sky. There was nothing there. And I decided to walk around the neighborhood, and there was an elderly lady I'd never seen before. And she said that other children in the neighborhood were frightened of something, that they saw the same thing I did. But what's strange is it was never reported in the media, in the newspaper. But I know that Idaho during that time had a lot of UFO reports. It was a hotbed of UFO reports during that time. So what actually happened, I don't know. But
was there missing time in that particular event for you, Betsey?
My mother claimed that it took me an hour to get home, so there must have been. And if I don't know if it was a screen memory that I was actually in this house hiding under a bed, because I don't remember anything after that, just being in this house and no one there. The door was unlocked. I think that was kind of normal during that time. Everybody trusted everybody, and nobody had break-ins or anything, so they left their doors unlocked.
Yeah,
so that wasn't abnormal. But, I don't know. I just don't know. But years later, right after my uncle had told me about the missing time, I decided to contact Bud Hopkins in New York, who was well known for his abduction cases, and I thought, well, maybe he could suggest someone in Los Angeles, where I lived at the time with my mom, if he could suggest someone that could regress us. So he suggested MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. Excuse me. And I contacted them, told them my story, and they sent renowned author Ann Druffel, and Earth Mysteries investigator that she is, and she's well known for her Tujunga Canyon contacts.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Right. So she regressed my mom and I separately. 1982 was the first regression on my mom, and the second one, I was regressed separately in 1983, the beginning of the year. And we both revealed some interesting things. Mine was a little more detailed, and I have to question if an 8-month-old baby could actually recall such an event. But I have to believe that some of the things that have happened in my life, there might be some truth to what I described, because I've had some amazing visions of earth changes, dreams. I had dreams shortly after that event in 1957 of huge earth changes, and I think we're in those times right now. Don't you?
Yeah, no, definitely. In 1957, you were 7 years old.
Right.
7-year-old children don't normally preoccupy themselves with something like earth changes. In fact, most people in the 1950s were enjoying post-war good life at that time.
That's true. But I was kind of abnormal, you'd say.
Now, you said your mother was a believer, and I find that interesting and rather exceptional as well, because most people at that time, if they were aware at all of what we now call the UFO experience, or nobody was talking about aliens except maybe if they were watching bad sci-fi movies. But your mother had a predisposition to believing in this. Was she a spiritual person? Was she somebody that had sort of an understanding of things that maybe were a little above normal?
I would say so. She was very psychic. She believed in reincarnation. She believed that she had many past lives. She recalled being in China helping to build the Great Wall of China, and actually said that she was buried inside the wall, which few people knew until later. They discovered that people were actually buried in the wall and she was a man in that lifetime. So that was interesting, but she could astral project. She knew about that. We used to play games together where she would have me guess with regular playing cards what color it was, and
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually lines up with me.
Really?
And I've talked about this. My mother bought me Kreskin's ESP kit. She also at one point gave me a Ouija board, which that still kind of flips me out. But there appears to be, and that actually goes into another question I was going to ask you. You, as a result of perhaps these encounters, also would have possibly been intuitive or somewhat psychic or experienced, let's say, spiritual gifts.
Right.
Is that reasonable to assume?
Yes, absolutely. I was able to tell her who was calling. I would know when the phone was ringing. We played that game, and so many times I had it right on. I knew who was going to be calling. I began to have experiences where I knew certain things were going to happen. Many events or dreams that I had, reoccurring dreams, actually showed me people that were going to pass away, family members, which, I hated those dreams.
Yeah.
But I did have a lot of characteristics of what people have talked about, the abduction experience. My mother and I both had nosebleeds, extreme nosebleeds when we were young. I had a feeling of being paralyzed, and I know she did too. Many times we would we'd take a nap in the afternoon, and we'd both talk about feeling paralyzed. We had scoop-shaped scars that couldn't be accounted for, explained, missing time, affecting electronic equipment. I mean, that happens all the time. It still happens to me. In fact, my husband and I were at the mall just around the holidays, and all of a sudden this whole string of lights just went out. I have this happen all the time. And just a lot of strange things. Of course, telekinesis. I have caused things to move. I did some experiments when I was in my teens with telekinesis. If you'd like, I'll relate one story, which is...
No, absolutely, please.
Okay. Well, I had this old Studebaker car, and I don't know the exact year it was. My uncle gave it to me, but of course no power steering on those old things. But it was hard to handle because it wouldn't stay on the road. You really had to hold on to it. And I was going down a country road late at night. There was no one there. It was really dark, and I decided to see if I could control it with my mind to make it stay on the road without swerving either way. And I did for I don't know how long. It seemed like a long time, but it was scary. I felt this incredible power, and all of a sudden I felt like there was someone sitting in the back seat, which really kind of freaked me out. And that's when I started to go off the road and into a ditch. But I've always, I've felt things like that. And when I was younger, I can tell you, I was looking up in the sky looking for UFOs. I was trying to levitate pencils in school. So I was not
nice.
a normal child.
Did you, as a result of your experiences, experience like psychic abilities, the ability to hear or feel people's thoughts or presence?
Oh, all the time. My mom and I could, we had telepathy. We could read each other's minds all the time. And, of course, my husband, I drive him crazy because I'm always reading his mind. I don't mean to, but I do. And, those are things that are just normal to me, but I know for some people it can unnerve them quite a bit.
So in 1982, I guess, you began to work with Ann Druffel.
That's correct.
And what was that like? You really had encounters with legends in this in this field. I mean, these are two giants, Bud Hopkins and Druffel, are both extremely well known. But I'm curious, this was hypnotic regression?
Right, it was. It was hypnotic regression. That was the second time I had been regressed. When I was much younger, a friend of my family tried to regress me, and I don't think anything really happened. But like I said, my mother was regressed separately. I wasn't able to hear it, so I wouldn't be influenced by what she said. And she felt, and what she described was extreme fear. I could hear it in her voice. The whole thing was taped, and later I was able to hear what she said, but she did not describe any ETs or UFOs. She thought she saw a plane in the sky, which was strange. But what she said was the sound didn't work up slowly. It was just like on them suddenly. And she said that one minute my father was outside the car, the next minute he was inside, and she tried to talk to him. They sat there for a few minutes after the whole thing happened. Nobody said anything. She said she kept having dreams afterwards that someone was trying to abduct her baby, and that's, quite a bit of what she, that's in a nutshell pretty much what she had felt or envisioned happened. But mine was a little more detailed. I felt that we had been beamed aboard, which sounds, Star Trek-ish, but I saw that, I visualized it, and my whole family, I saw my dad and mom going up in this beam of light. I saw this spaceship, the little grays, and I thought they looked like me because they had bald heads. And I didn't feel any fear. In fact, I felt very comfortable. But I know my mom was encased in some kind of clear tube, and she kept calling out to me and trying to find out where I was, or she was really hysterical because she didn't know what had happened to me. My father, I could see, was in another area, and I know there was some kind of experiment. I felt that there was something put into the back of my neck, and and I described some kind of thing that wasn't really a triangle that flew over me like a light, but it was curved. It had soft edges, so I'm not sure what I was describing with that. And that's pretty much what it was, what I described, that we were put back into the car. My parents were like in a trance. I think they were staring straight ahead. I don't know how I could see these things that I saw, but I kept describing all these strange shadows that I could see out the back window, and that my parents were agitated. My father, excuse me, was really agitated and upset. One minute they were there, one minute they weren't. So it was a strange regression. And, of course, that's in my book. It goes into more detail.
So you in the regression began to recall the presence of grace. Do you recall at any time, but specifically in this occasion, other beings, other entities other than grace?
When I was 8 years old, a year later, I did wake up in the middle of the night, and I had heard many things in this house that we lived in. We had a lot of poltergeist activity in this one house that we lived in. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and I saw this gauzy form of a man standing next to my bed. And I was so frightened, I just pulled the covers over my head and kept praying it would go away. I couldn't scream. I was so frightened. And the next morning, of course, it was gone. But this house, I can tell you, was a little spooky. We would hear, my mom would be downstairs doing laundry, and all of a sudden hear this pounding like somebody with heavy foot was jumping up and down or walking across the floor. She'd run upstairs. There was nothing around. So I know a lot of people that have been abducted or experiencers have had that, experience of poltergeist activity.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The two seem, in many cases, to be parallel.
Right.
You mentioned that you have interesting experiences with electrical devices. Do you find that to be a consistent thing? Do things tend to kind of skits out around you, Betsey?
They do. And it's really annoying sometimes. Yeah, it does. It happens a lot. And I've just kind of, I just shake my head when something goes on. It's very frustrating when something goes out my computer or just other things around here. You could ask my husband. He'll verify that.
Yeah, he probably gets to fix all this stuff.
He does. I feel sorry for him. I really do.
Along with that, I'm curious about growing up. Did you... How do I want to phrase this? In the course of going through school, anybody who went through school in that period, I'm younger than you, but I remember some things in terms of being tested. And a lot of the people that I've talked to that are contactees generally tend to have exceptional IQ, exceptional abilities. Anything like that?
Well, I was not a person that loved school. I really didn't. I felt a lot of things in our school books, I don't know why I thought this, were true. I felt that we were reading books that were antiquated, that, that just wasn't the whole truth. And I don't know where that came from. I know my mother believes much of the Bible had extraterrestrials in it, especially Ezekiel and even Lot, perhaps, were actually descriptions of aliens and not, angels. So there was that. But no, I wasn't brilliant in school, that's for sure.
Okay, I just wondered because a lot of times people who are experiencers also are contacted through testing that occurs in schools and things like that, and oftentimes they are even you'll notice the presence of people who are very interested in you. It's not consistent, but I've noticed that's one of the patterns that I see with people who are early life experiencers as well. I've always felt that, when I came in, when I was very young, that this wasn't the body I had. I felt this wasn't my true home, and I know many people my age feel that too. I've always felt that. And I've felt that I was here for a reason. I felt that something was going to happen when I became older. In fact, I remember shortly after my second UFO encounter that I was given a message. I don't know who gave me the message, but I was told I would forget what that message was until the time was right. And I know many experiencers are sensing that they were given a message and the message was blocked for some reason, and now we're all beginning to remember what that message is. Yeah. Did you have a sense of destiny that, the best I understand children is children pretty much flow through life, but there are people that I've talked to who recount that they always had a sense of, and I talked about this in the introduction to the show tonight as well, a sense of destiny, a sense that this time was a time of transition and that they played a role in it. Yes,
I felt that, and not to be egotistical or anything, I've just felt that in my heart, and it's hard to explain when you tell people you have that feeling. It's just a knowing deep within your heart. You can't explain it, but you know that it's there, and there is a reason you're here. And I know many people out there that have talked about that, like you said. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and it's interesting. This is how we kind of intersect. I was pretty much raised reading from the age of probably about 4 or 5. My mother taught me to read, and my grandmother read the Bible to me. So I grew up reading Scripture, and so that book was impressed upon me very early, especially the prophetic side of it. Did I understand it all? No, not at that point. But I got to tell you that as time went on, the book of Revelation became something that I got very deeply into. And then as I began to understand the Bible, I began to look at Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And, you can do entire shows on the first chapter of Ezekiel. But yeah, I mean, like you, like your mother, I had the sense that there was something very strange going on that they didn't talk about in church. Right. And that was true in my experience throughout any time that I ventured into the religious mainstream, was that they really seemed to not be able to deal with the subject of what was really going on in the Scriptures. And then if you go back and you begin to look at Genesis chapter 6, and it's like, wow, there really is something going on here. I mean, there's beings and they're not human, and they're mating with human women, and they're producing what I guess we would call hybrids. And there's all this wild stuff going on, but we have this tame religious system that won't deal with any of this. So we now have a world that's completely ignorant about what these ancient books record.
Oh, sure, absolutely. There's just so much that's been hidden from us, and many lies that should have been disclosed to us that haven't, and, it's still going on. They want to keep us in the dark, unilluminated, even though they are the Illuminati, and, I do get into that a little bit, but I feel there's a spiritual war going on right now. I don't know how you feel about that. But,
I've described it in those exact terms many times on many different levels. However you view these beings, we're caught in a play between worlds, in my opinion. It's kind of a shadow world that goes on. And somehow in the middle of all of this, there's this huge interest in this creature called man. And I don't mean that in terms of man, the gender, but man in terms of man, the creation. There's this huge interest. There's something about us that draws these beings, whether they're angels, whether they're aliens, whatever they are, demons. It draws them toward us, and it seems there's something about us that they don't understand and that they want.
Right. I've always felt that too. I've always felt that we have been watched. I've always had that feeling that I'm being watched. I don't know why I've always felt that, but I've felt that. And it was confirmed to me in Ray Fowler's books, Watchers 1 and 2, about Betty, Andreas, and Luca, and her experiences with the ETs, but there was also the elders, and they say they watch us. And know everything we do. It's kind of like they are the keepers of the Akashic records. They determine everything that we do, and a lot of her experiences seem to be melted in with not just ET but religious events too. Maybe they downloaded her memories to make her feel more comfortable. I don't know, but many people have had that experience. So, the question is, are they angelic? Are they ETs? Are they interdimensional? Maybe we have a combination of all these beings that are watching us right now. I think so.
I've come to look at it as a whole cosmology of beings, and separating them out is very difficult. But there does appear to be a whole host of beings that play through this whole thing, and sometimes separating them is real hard. I have a question that came out of the chat room. Sure. And it'll maybe take us in a little bit different direction, but we'll pull back. They asked, what was it about you and your family that would cause you to be chosen by, they term it as aliens here, entities, beings, whatever. Do you have a sense that there was something specific about your family that drew these experiences?
That's a good question, and I've often asked that question myself about the people that seem to be abducted. Why? And not go to some scientist. I've heard maybe there's a couple of people that have had experiences, but why not somebody that is an MIT physicist, or somebody that they should contact? Why are they going to just common people? I would say my father had an engineering background. He was quite brilliant in math. My mother was an artist. She took some art classes in college. She did do a thesis, which is kind of interesting, on the shift of the Earth's axis. This was back in 1948. No, which is, nobody was talking about the Earth shifting.
Right, yeah.
And where she ever came up with that, but she did a whole thesis on it and said it was quite possible. She always believed that the Earth was going to shift again. So, I think because of her and her psychic perceptions, I think I inherited a lot of that. My father did have a few experiences through the years. He knew when Mount St. Helens was going to blow. He had a dream of the goddess Pele from Hawaii, who is the goddess of volcanoes.
Right.
And she came to him and told him that there was going to be a volcano that exploded. And I had dreams of Mount St. Helens blowing too for days. So I've had many, many visions, and some of them are symbolic, some are actually what is going to happen. So I never know how, usually when the dreams repeat, that's something that's actually going to happen the way I've dreamed it.
I know that you're an investigator, and you've been doing this longer than I have. But I look at this, and I tend to ask questions that go along the lines of establishing data points. One of the areas that interests me has to do even with physical characteristics, things like blood types, things like eye color, skin makeup, things like that. There are, and I'm sure you know this, there are profiles of people who are experiencers, abductees, contactees, however you want to classify that fall into a stratum of statistics that are just off the wall. NICAP published I guess what you would call an unscientific statistical study a few years ago on blood types of abductees.
Oh, tell me.
And discovered that within the percentage of Rh negative, specifically AB negative people that were in this survey, it was just off the wall. That is the rarest. These are the rarest blood types. They fall into, and please don't hold me accountable to the numbers because I'm terrible at them, like 3% of the population, but the level of abductions within that group were statistically just abnormal. And I don't remember the exact number right now, but it was enough that when you looked at it, you went, there's clearly something up, regardless of how small the statistical body was. And a lot of people have, questioned issues around the Rh negative factor, which is that this was not an original blood type to the Earth. That this, and I've talked to geneticists about this and scientists about this who tell me that they believe strongly that the Rh negative blood factor was not part of the original races of the Earth, that this was a mutation.
Interesting.
So when I go at this, a lot of times the way I look at it is I try to compile information, not to come to the conclusion, but to just try to understand if in fact we are products of genetic mutation, and if in fact within the human race itself there are not remnants of what I guess we would call some ancient genetics experiments.
Right. Well, I'm just normal type O positive. And I think that's pretty common out there. So I'm not in that category, that's for sure. Are you?
Yeah, actually I am.
You are? Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I looked at your picture,
category.
and you're very fair-skinned, and it looks like you're blonde. And I thought, well, I need to ask you that. It's, here again, it's like any statistical thing that you look at. It's not something that you can go by 100%, but sometimes it's a guideline to something. Sure. And it's just interesting to me. It's just one of those data points that I track along the way. The other one is there, are there the presence of military in your family background?
No, my father was in the Army Air Corps, but that's it. I've kind of traced back some of my relatives on Ancestry.com. There wasn't anything outstanding. Supposedly, I think General Jackson was in the family. I think Mary Queen of Scots was a family member.
Well, that's pretty significant, Betsey.
Poor thing, she lost her head, yes. But, some relative did that research, and I haven't been able to confirm that, so that's what he claimed. Mary Queen of Scots was in the family.
Yeah, and again, everybody's got their own method for doing this. I'm not scientific in any way. A lot of what I deal with is anecdotal. It's talking to people, and it's reading the reports that come out of MUFON and other organizations as well. And another thing that I've noticed, and I noticed that somebody commented on our chat boards tonight about this, things have been quiet. In terms of experiences and even sightings, and I've heard this from investigators as well, that things have been quiet since, I guess, probably about the middle of 2010 through 2012. That
I don't know about that.
Really?
Yeah, there's just, I've heard Peter Davenport with the UFO Center in Seattle has been saying there's been all kinds of these fireballs that are seen flying in formation, seen all over the world. Yeah, so it's been a hotbed of stuff out there, which is really interesting because I seem to notice that when we start getting this great number of sightings, there seems to be a huge earthquake, and we just have the 8.0 in the Solomon Islands. So, I think they've been warning us. Just before the big Japanese earthquake in 2011, there were all the UFO sightings over Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock of the Dome. I don't know if I always say that backwards.
Yeah, it's actually the Dome of the Rock, I think.
Yeah. So, there's just been a lot of things, but I think they're warning us out there when certain events happen. It's kind of like Mothman who appeared before, the bridge collapsed.
Right, Yeah, that's interesting, because the Mothman thing actually goes back to that same era as well. I have a guy that I interview occasionally named Andrew Colvin who lived in that town when that event happened, and the stories that were told there about the Mothman and the appearance of the Men in Black is really interesting. You ever encounter any MIBs?
I haven't. But I did have a really strange experience. I was camping with a friend. This is during the 90s in Idaho, central Idaho, and we had gone to a hot springs and decided to camp out in the area and just put down the back of the blazer and just put our sleeping bags back there. It was late. We had gone to several places, but it was packed. Everything was packed. There was lots of people in one area. So we kind of drove away from everybody and just backed the car into this one little spot. And I remember before it really got dark that this area where we had parked, there was all this brush and dense foliage, and there was a tree that had fallen down. It was just really dense with foliage and everything. So I thought, well, that's, we're away from everybody. And suddenly I woke up. I don't know how long I'd been sleeping, but I couldn't move. I woke up and I heard voices go by really fast, but I couldn't understand anything that was being said. It was like some foreign language. And my friend woke up. He couldn't move. We just laid there, and suddenly he sat up, turned around, and looked at me, just had this fearful look on his face, and there was nobody behind us. It was dark. There was no flashlight. You know, you'd think that if somebody was running behind us, that there would be a flashlight, some kind of light. But whoever was there ran behind us. There was nothing, or they glided behind us. I don't know what. But they were gone, and he said, "Let's get out of here. You know, there's something wrong here." So we left the area.
So there was a presence that everybody sensed about this campsite.
I felt that there was something strange there, and especially after what had happened, that we couldn't move, that feeling of paralysis that happened. So I have to say that there was something there, and someone was there. We couldn't understand what they were saying, or at least I couldn't. I don't know if he had actually heard them speaking, but I did. And I don't know, it wasn't a language I knew or could, I just couldn't understand what it was.
Have you experienced what I guess we could define as maybe voice-to-skull communication or languages other than what you would understand?
No, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Okay. In other words, you don't have the sense that you've had like direct communications that were given to you in a way that was nonverbal but was still understandable inside your head.
The only thing I can relate to is dreams, the constant dreams I've had over and over through the years of being in school.
Okay.
I'll wake up and I'll feel something. I will have a thought about time travel. I don't know where any of that comes from, but, I've included that in my book, some of the things that I feel that I've been told. But a lot of times I don't remember. I just remember that I'm in some kind of school being taught, and it's important, and that's all I know. And I wish I could recall it. I've tried many, many times to recall what I'm being told. There have been times where I will hear spirit voices early in the morning. Just after waking up, I'll hear someone calling my name. I used to hear this all the time, and finally I had to tell them, if you're not going to say something important, don't do that. Enough.
Well, that's actually pretty interesting, because here again, this idea of being in school or being taught, being trained, is one of those images that I've heard from a lot of people.
Right.
And the specifics are usually not recallable.
Right.
And that's interesting, too, because it means that they have locked this up and then they release it. And we talked about this earlier, and I guess where I'm going with this is towards the end of your book, you go into some very specific prophecies, and we can talk about that. But how much of what you understood about where we're at right now, we just, in less than, maybe 7 or 8 weeks ago, passed through this Rubicon called December 21st,
right,
which I think is kind of an artificial date, but
I do too.
We've made passage through a very interesting period of time. In the course of last year, Betsey, what was your sense about what was happening, maybe not so much in terms of external events, but what was happening to the consciousness of humanity?
Well, I think we're all starting to awaken right now. I think some more slowly than others, but others are getting it right away. And I think as soon as we awaken that there's just this mass consciousness of awakening, I think doors that have been shut to us, veils that have been put up, will come down, and we will understand so much more. There will be the understanding of what Earth is about dimensions, about other dimensional beings. I think there's many, many dimensions out there and beings that are in these dimensions, interdimensional beings. I think that there are just many, many worlds, and time as we know it doesn't really exist.
Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't. We think it does.
That's another one of those things, and I've always believed that. Mm-hmm. And I've read endless numbers of books by physicists and scientists on time, and I've gone back through my own journals, because I've kept journals since I was probably about 13 years old. One of the great quandaries in my life has been this issue of time and what it really is, because
Right.
I've experienced timelessness, and I've experienced it repeatedly. Mm-hmm. And I actually now find it more pleasurable than 3D life, because we live by clocks in this culture. And that really sucks. But I have the sense, like what you just articulated, that time is not real. It seems to be a false precept.
It's an illusion.
Yeah, it is an illusion. And that seems to be part of this awakening, that people who begin to awaken begin to sense dimensional shifts, senses of time shifting, time changing, time streams, and then just a complete collapse of time within the consciousness. Is that something that you see in the people that you talk to and interact with as well?
Right. I feel it. I love the TV series, the Fox TV series, The Fringe. I loved it.
Yes.
Wasn't that great?
Yeah, that was wonderful. I was totally addicted.
But it did get into parallel worlds, and there's so many stories of people that have just gone on a walk somewhere and ended up in another time, or there's stories of people that were actually shifted into another time somewhere in the past. And I believe the past and the future are happening right now. There are many, many futures that we can take and experience, but they're all happening, and there's just many paths too. And I know that sounds all crazy, but what I've uncovered about time travel is Mark Everett, who is the band leader for the rock band The Eels.
Yes.
Mark's father, Hugh Everett
I know
III.
who he is, yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Tell that story. This is great.
He's an American physicist, or was. He died in 1982. But he proposed the many-world or parallel worlds theory of quantum physics. And he termed his relative state formulation, is what he called it, or renamed it many worlds. But many physicists and a scientist felt that he didn't know what he was talking about, but he was, I think, vindicated when they did what they called the double-slit experiment with electrons and protons in the 1980s.
Yep.
They were fired through two slit openings on a screen, produced some really weird results in quantum mechanics. Instead of the protons making two patterns on the screen, on the other side of the screen, it made three smudge patterns. So where did that, the scientists were left scratching their heads. How did this happen? So, there's been other experiments too, but I think that shows that there is something else happening that we don't understand.
Another thing that I've had discussions with people about is people who have encountered themselves or an aspect of themselves. And I find this incredibly interesting. I don't know that I have a recollection of that exact experience, but I've conceived of it. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of that, and, I think deja vu has something to do with that, too, where we actually jump into the future for a moment, and you have that feeling that it's happened before. Well, perhaps it has, and maybe we keep repeating these things, too. I kind of think, what I have seen in my dreams is, our world is kind of like a great big... what is that? Slinky. I see it as a slinky.
A coil.
Coil. Right, right.
Which goes into vortex theory and the idea that the universe is basically formed around spirals and vortex and very interesting patterns of energy.
And suppose, like the movie Back to the Future, maybe we can, after we die, and our consciousness isn't focused here any longer, that we can jump onto any place on this slinky, this coil, and relive this life again in the way that we wanted to. We can keep changing the outcome. Isn't that a strange thought?
No, actually, I've entertained that very theory with a group of people who have described experiences of moving interdimensionally and describing it as, if you know what an egg beater looks like, it's a handle and then oblonged, not circular, but actually an elongated. If you took a circular structure and stretched it out, it would be in that shape. It's an egg beater. They've described the egg beater as having one of those whisks, if you know what a whisk is, on each end, and being able to jump from place to place on the whisk. And then the handle itself, I'm just putting this out as a visual, is actually what you would call central station. It is the place where you go back to the central point.
Right. Interesting. Right. It really is mind-boggling, isn't it?
But people talk about this now, and maybe it's just the circles I travel in, but I find that people talk about interesting things very openly now, things that you might possibly have sent you off to the psychiatrist back in the 60s.
Oh, sure.
We're now able to talk about it. What I find interesting about you as well, you were recalling stuff like this before the internet was available. So you didn't have a context for a lot of this information.
I didn't. You're so right. You're right. And somehow I've known these things, and it's becoming clearer and clearer all the time as I get older. A lot of these things are just coming to me out of the clear blue. I'll wake up in the morning and go, oh, okay, I understand. And I can't explain it, if you try and explain some of these things to people, what's happening to you, what you're feeling, they go, okay, like you said, cuckoo.
Well, and that's another aspect to this that I think is interesting, Betsey. I keep having this conversation of describing things to people that have a commonality, and we come to a place where verbal breaks down, where our words no longer are sufficient to describe an experience. It's what the French call je ne sais quoi, which means you either know or you don't know. You understand, but there really are no words.
Right, exactly. Well, I would rather just deal with telepathy, It would be so much easier, I think. And just think, there would be no more lies. How could people lie to you anymore? It'd always be the truth. Wouldn't that be amazing?
I'm thinking about doing a radio show by telepathy.
There you go.
I'm thinking that may be the future.
It is.
People were talking about the internet going down, and I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I suspect some of the earth changes, and we're going to talk about this in the second hour, some of the earth changes that are scheduled almost have within them the built-in impact of pretty much taking out our electrical system, which would include the internet. So how very interesting if people began to develop their abilities and didn't need Facebook anymore, but could simply sit down and tune into a group of people and get that collective consciousness thing going.
Well, I think the new children coming in right now are showing many of these abilities, and they're just amazing, gifted children. They remember past lives, they're telepathic, they're extremely psychic, they are savants in areas of music, math. They're just incredible. And, you know, the sad thing is we've got the family of dark out there trying to destroy these children through drugs and so many different things. And we have to help these children. We really do.
I actually think they may wind up helping us in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they know that these things are coming. And I think they will be the strong ones to help many, many people, the adults, through a lot of these earth changes. I noticed that one child, which was amazing, they interviewed her after Hurricane Sandy hit, and she said she kept telling her parents to leave, and they wouldn't listen. She was really upset about that. Why wouldn't you listen to me? But she said what was amazing is that after it happened, she didn't want to connect anymore with her internet, with her cell phone. She wanted to be outside and connect with nature. She said that her family was together and having dinner together and having conversations again. The family was united again. So there were some positive things that came out of that, especially with the children.
Yeah, well, that was an extraordinary storm that had some amazing energies loaded into it. Hey, we're going to take the 1 hour break here, Betsey, and come back on the other side, and I want to talk to you a little bit about some of your prophecies, about some of the things that you see, that you have seen, and I want to talk to you a little bit about synchronicity as well.
That's great.
We'll do all of that when we come back on the other side of Off Planet Radio Live. Take a quick break here, and we'll be right back.
This is Off Planet Radio.